Good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar on student employment. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Kim Roskowitz from University Human Resources. And I know you're all here today. We sent out a communication on Monday afternoon regarding student employment, and in particular, paying international students for the work that they're doing for Brown. And so we look forward to having a presentation today, and at the end having an opportunity for some questions and answers from our team. Please note that you can use the Q&A tool to submit questions throughout the presentation, and we'll get to them at the end. You can also raise your hand, and we have Luba Niemann with us today, and she's going to serve as our moderator at the end following our presentation. I just wanted to take a quick minute to briefly go around and introduce our panelists today. We have a multidisciplinary group from a number of different areas to help answer questions today. I'm just going to go around how I'm seeing them on my screen. So we have Tanya Rosa from Purchasing, Cindy Gilbert from Tax and Payroll, Luba Niemann from the EVP's office, Jane Bonasich from Purchasing, Raphael Jones from Payroll and Tax, Steph Altamari Kavanaugh from Workday Program, John Hayden, Accounts Payable, Charlene Sweeney in Accounts Payable, Controller, Finance, Elizabeth Scotto from University Human Resources and Student Employment, and Kelly Adams from University Human Resources, Student Employment. So if you want to bring the presentation up, I will turn it over to Elizabeth Scotto, who's going to start off with talking about student employment hiring.
Thank you, Kim. So we wanted to provide a quick overview just on student employment hiring. We want to be able to post all student employment opportunities in Workday. As we're looking to enter these requests in the system, we need to be sure to indicate either a remote or on-site status in the student job title listed in parentheses, along with including the location. On-site jobs, just as a friendly reminder, must be approved on a return to campus plan prior to entering them into the system. On the requisition process now, we've embedded a new hiring questionnaire in Workday that will be needed to be completed. As always, just as another friendly reminder, students must be hired before they begin working. If a student worker is working remotely, we're also asking that in the comments section in Workday that there's a field that we add into the comment section that they are working remotely so that we can look at approving these job requests as quickly as possible. If the selected student worker is working remotely outside of the US and is a non-resident alien, we need to adjust how we pay these individuals. So I am going to transition the next slide over to Raphael. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Just one quick addition to Elizabeth's slide. We all know that this has been challenging for all of us and for all of you as well. And we know that you all potentially don't know who has been international and who is in the US, so we are here all to support you. And so as we go through these next slides, just keep in mind that at the end of this, there will be the Q&A session where you can ask all of your questions. But also, if you currently have any individuals who are working and have not been paid, please, please, please reach out to one of us, either student employment or the payroll office, because we really need to get those individuals paid by one of these two methods that we're going to talk about now. So what's not changing? If you are a US citizen, permanent resident, or resident alien, nothing is changing in the process. These individuals will stay on payroll. They'll continue to go through the I-9 process if they are a US citizen, permanent resident. Resident aliens will need to complete both the I-9 and FNIS process in order to be fully able to receive their payment. Students in this category are taxed on worldwide income. So even if they're an international student but are considered a resident alien, they do get taxed in the US. So they will get either a W-2, 1042S, or both, depending on their status and whether they have treaty benefits or not. Next slide, please. What is changing? So you saw the communication that came out, and that really relates to this slide and all of the process that you're going to see going forward. So really, this only applies to non-resident aliens. So our non-resident aliens who are working outside of the US cannot be paid on US payroll. Now, the main reason for that is if they are non-resident, they're not subject to US taxation. And therefore, keeping them on payroll really isn't doing them any justice and could potentially be putting their visa status at risk. And we don't want to do that to any of our students. So the process going forward is going to be any of these non-resident aliens must register as a supplier to be paid out of accounts payable. Charlene will go over some of that piece, and Jane will go over the supplier registration piece. The FNIS may be required to determine tax status. So as I said, it only applies to non-resident aliens. So some international students will fall into the resident alien and some will fall into the non-resident alien. Unfortunately, only my team really has access to that information. So we'll be working for those who are new and just getting hired through the student hiring process. We'll be working with student employment to get those tax determinations and determine which process you need to follow. For those who you already have working, my team is working through a list to try to figure out which individuals need to be moved based on their tax status. But if you have individuals who are overseas and you know they are overseas, please reach out to us, ask us for their tax status, and we can help you which way to go forward. And our email address for that will be controller_payroll, which will be at the end of this slide, at the end of this presentation. In addition, no I-9 is going to be required for these individuals since they are not on payroll. That also eliminates the issues of potential social security numbers and having to go through that process. In addition, individuals will need to submit Form W-8-BEN, which I believe was forwarded along with the communication. If you have questions on how students fill that out, or if there's any questions onto what the form is, please reach out to us again or submit a Q&A, and we'll be happy to answer that as well. Income will all be treated as foreign sourced income and will not be subject to US withholding or reporting, which means that from a US tax perspective, we're paying them, we're not taxing them. However, these students may be responsible for reporting that in their home countries, depending on the laws of their home country. So some foreign jurisdictions will require them to report, some will not. Unfortunately, that burden is going to be put on the students. And then when the individual, this is a key point here, when the individuals do return to the US, we must move them from this AP process back onto payroll. So we have to go through the whole job process through student employment. They will have to I-9 at that point. They will have to complete their FNIS. And that really has to be done timely. So as soon as you know someone returns, we have to move them to payroll. So we really need to keep track of where these students are and how we're paying them, because if they are in the US and getting paid via accounts payable, that could put their immigration status at risk. And we all need to make sure we're not doing that either intentionally or unintentionally. Next slide. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jane.
Thank you, Raphael. Hello, I'm Jane. Nice to be presenting to you all. And I'm here to talk to you about how these students who need to get invoices must register to get put into Workday so that an invoice can be created for them. So the students themselves have to register, and we ask them to do that because we're asking for highly confidential information. And they will register using the university supplier and individual payee registration form. The link is right there in this page. Now, I'm going to talk to you about certain questions we get a lot. So if you get this question, you'll know how to answer it. But basically, in section 1, we were going to ask them to provide the address of their current location. Not their Brown address, but wherever they are now, they have to provide the current location. And in section 2, for the reason for payment by individual, we're asking them to say undergraduate student abroad. They can type that right in there. We need that in order to group them the right way in Workday so that you can run reports if you have to. Also, and I know people are going to say really to this question, but really we get this question. If the student is unsure if they are a foreign national or a resident of another country, they ought to answer yes. That way we can vet them properly with Raphael's team. The preferred method of payment is ACH for them. So if the student has a bank account in the United States and no funds will be transferred out of that bank account and moved abroad, then we're asking them to register as ACH so that they can get an electronic funds transfer, which means basically an automatic deposit into the checking or savings account that they tell us they want to use. And the payment terms will be set up as immediate. So it doesn't matter what they put on the form. When we know that it's an undergraduate student abroad, we will make sure, Tanya and I will make sure that they will get immediate payment, so there will be no delay.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to quickly go through the process that you'll need to do to get the students paid through accounts payable. So once the student's registered as a supplier, now you'll have the ability to select them when creating a supplier invoice. But just as a reminder, just to reiterate the importance, it's just the non-resident alien students who will be submitting an invoice. And each time they need to submit the invoice, they need to also submit their W-8 Ben form each time they are requesting payment. This invoice should be sent to their departmental contact, someone who can verify the hours worked and that it was performed timely, and to make sure they're employed correctly in that role. It would be their main contact that they should send this to. An example of this invoice was sent out in the communication. It's just to track time and hours, how much they expect to get paid, as well as what their foreign jurisdiction is. Recently, OSP reached out to me because it appears that there's some students who are being paid on federal grants. So we're going to be creating another invoice to have additional language for students who are being paid on those grants to certify effort and so forth. So that'll be forthcoming along. So once the department receives the invoice, that department's financial coordinator will be able to create the supplier invoice in Workday. Now when creating the supplier invoice, like I said, once that student is set up as a supplier, you'll be able to pick that, attach the invoice along with the W-8 Ben form. In addition, we've created a new spend category within Workday for these specific payments. It's not listed here, but the name of that spend category is undergraduate foreign source payments. I'll put it in the chat so everyone can see it once I get through this slide. And as we know, it's just going to follow through the normal Workday business process for supplier invoices. It'll route to the cost center manager for approval. And then once that cost center manager approves, it will then go to Raphael's team in tax, and then to accounts payable. So once it completes the whole business process, it will be ready and available for settlement. So to Jane's point, once we get that green check and it's all approved, then when we do our next settlement within accounts payable, that invoice will get selected for payment. And just to kind of go back to what Jane said about methods of payment and selection. So if a student doesn't have a US bank account, they won't be able to choose ACH. So they have to choose check. They need to make sure they have the right address in that the check will get mailed to. However, there may be cases where a student does it in some of these international locations, a student cannot deposit a US-based check either. If that occurs to your student, we do have the ability to wire the funds to the student. It's not ideal, but we know we want to make sure they get paid for their work. So if that's the case, you'll need to reach out to accounts payable, and we'll have to get you a wire authorization form to work with the student. Again, it's kind of, you know, a sensitive information with the student's bank account, but that is an option if ACH or check do not work for that particular student.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to speak to some student employment reminders and updates. Students who are on campus must have completed the online educational module sent by Campus Life and signed the student commitment to COVID-19 community health and safety requirements. Also, students must complete the I-9 form process. Departments and student managers can utilize the student I-9 verification report to check the I-9 status of students. And just to repeat what Raphael already stated in his slides, that the I-9 form is not required for students who are non-resident aliens working outside of the U.S. However, when the student returns to the United States, they must complete the I-9 form. Students who need to complete the I-9 form process should email the HR Service Center at hrservicecenter@brown.edu. On-campus students in the area can schedule an appointment to visit the HR Service Center. Next slide, please. Just another reminder, please submit any and additional job processes no later than October 16th for any student workers who are not currently or actively working, and for any current international remote student workers who are non-resident aliens who are working outside of the United States, transitioning to the supplier invoice process. You can notify student employment to unpost student jobs or close any student job requisitions. And going forward, there will be periodic audits of current international remote student workers to ensure compliance with this new policy or processes. And I think we're going to turn it back over to Kim. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Kelly. And so I just wanted to, in addition to the few reminders that Kelly provided, just wanted to add one more piece which has evolved in our current environment. We've worked closely with the Dean of the College and Campus Life to create some guidelines for student workers who need to either quarantine or isolate due to COVID-19. So guidance for you as managers would be, and this is primarily going to be for students who are working on campus, but it could be some remote workers too that may need to quarantine or isolate and are not able to work. So the first question really should be, can the work be performed remotely, or is it already being performed remotely? And can that continue? Is the student in a situation where they can continue to work? If the answer is no, these students should be able to use any of their available sick and safe leave time. As well, they should continue to be paid for any scheduled hours throughout the duration of their quarantine or isolation. And then just only in an instance where the student's quarantine or isolation was the direct result of an either unauthorized travel or a violation of the COVID-19 campus safety policy, only the sick and safe leave time would be available, and that should be paid for the students that are unable to work while they're in either quarantine or isolation. Next slide, please. So just wanted to thank everyone on our team of panelists and for everyone participating today in the webinar. We will share these slides. We'll send them out after, and we are recording this session. So if you have any specific questions following the webinar, you can reach out to any of these contacts. But for now, I will turn it over to Luba, and we can answer some questions that have come during the presentation.
Well, thank you, Kim. I can start with some questions that were submitted during the registration process. And in the meantime, if anybody has a question, you can always raise a hand and we'll let you speak on the microphone. One of the questions that came in says, we've had issues with faculty hiring undergrads and having them work before the admins are told. The students haven't completed their I-9 and kept track of hours worked, and it causes a huge mess. How do you suggest we deal with this issue? Is there any procedure you can suggest that will prevent this from happening?
I think I'll just, thank you, Luba. I think I'll just start by maybe encouraging departments to, whoever is managing student employment in the departments, really to communicate as much as you can with your teams, with faculty, either through your chairs or other means, to really underscore how important it is that students are actually hired and before they begin working. I think that's the best option. And you can reach out to us as well at Student Employment. And if we need to help intervene, we're happy to do that.
Thank you, Kim. There is also a question about stipended student staffers. And the question is, can they be paid through the invoicing process as well in a lump sum? For example, $300 for the semester. And I'm not sure if this should go to Charlene or Raphael.
I could take the question. So yes, individuals can, if they are abroad overseas, they don't have to necessarily be receiving the salaried pay. They can get a $300 for the semester. We do want to be careful though, that we are providing them with money that they've done the work for. So we don't want to be giving money for services that aren't going to be completed, because we may run into issues of trying to recoup that at a later point. But it is doable, and you can use this same spend category for that.
So I don't see any open questions. I would encourage everybody to look through the Q&A tab. All the questions have been answered currently. Okay, and something just came in, so let's see. It takes over a month for student positions to be processed. How can this be fixed? It takes so long and students need to work. I guess this is for student employment.
Elizabeth, yeah.
Yeah, so when the pandemic first started, we had a hiring freeze in place for not only staff positions, but student employment positions as well. So we were reviewing student jobs as they were coming in, and there was a lot of back and forth at the time to try to gather more information about the student jobs that have since been introduced into the questionnaire. So as part of the presentation, we had advised that when new positions go into the system now for requests for student jobs, the questionnaire now has all of that information in order for us to make a faster decision. We've also lifted some of the restrictions for the senior leadership review process now that we're into the month of September, I believe, is when it first started. So now that as long as the questionnaire is answered and we have the comments in this comment section about the remote student workers, whether they're remote on site, whether they've been on the return to campus plan, if we have all of that information that we need, then we can approve the requisitions a lot faster in the process, and the time to fill should improve. Kim, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Thank you. I know that the team is working hard to move everything through, and as you know, at the beginning of any semester, there are a lot of requests coming in, but we're moving along. Yep.
Yeah, and just to follow up in Kim's comment, the month of September is our highest volume of transactions, and we doubled the amount of volume of transaction in 1 month. So normally we would have on average 1,500 or so transactions for student employment, and that went up to over 3,200 transactions in the month of September. So we're working as quickly as we can, and I hope that the questionnaire will help to improve the routing and the approvals.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Kim. There is a question here about whether this team will prepare some sort of frequently asked questions and provide a link for everyone.
Yeah, so we did start putting that together, and we will add to it from the questions today and the answers that have been provided. So we will post that and send that out as well.
Thank you. A question from someone who has just hired a UTA and found out that that particular student is located in Canada. The student was hired through Workday job posting, and they're not sure what to do about it. Should they reach out to someone? Should they do something in Workday? What are the next steps? I'm sorry, I'm not sure if we're taking the question.
Yeah,
I was just going to speak to the Workday processes. If the student is a non-resident alien working outside of the US, then you would need to end the student job in Workday and then transition them over to the new supplier invoice process. Raphael, I don't know if you have something.
Yeah, so you'll want to reach out to controller_payroll with the student's name and Workday ID. That way we can determine whether they are a resident alien or non-resident alien. And then you can follow either the end job process and go through that supplier invoice, or we can determine that they do need, in fact, stay on payroll if they are a resident alien. So if you send us that email, we'll take a look at it as quickly as possible and get back to you.
Thank you. Could you remind for everyone, or maybe somebody can type this answer, who the student employment liaisons are in AFA?
so I believe we've worked with Sarah Perry in the past in AFA for student employment.
Okay, thank you. I understand, well, let me see. I'm trying to group some of these questions together. There are questions about, first of all, are the students authorized to work in person at this point? And then there are also questions about hiring students who are on leave as seasonal intermittent staff employees. So maybe somebody from student employment can take that.
Yeah, I can start with that. So for students to be approved to work on campus, it must be part of a department's return to campus plan. It needs to be submitted to the correct committee to review the request to have a student work on campus, and they would need to approve that. Students cannot be working on campus if they're not part of an approved plan. And then I've already forgotten the second part of the question, Luba.
The second was about hiring students who are on leave as seasonal intermittent.
Do you want to take that, Elizabeth?
Sure. So we are able to hire them into a staff position as a seasonal intermittent job. So you can reach out to Employment at Brown and we will help you with that process. Compensation has created some special job profiles for those situations where students are on a leave of absence and we need to hire them into a staff seasonal intermittent position.
Thank you. I just want to let everybody know, please keep looking at the Q&A section. Some of the questions are being answered by the panelists in writing, and you should be able to see the written responses right there on the Q&A. So I won't be reading those responses, but you do have access to them. And now back to some questions. Is there a way to check the status of my student workers who may be international? Is there something to run in Workday in particular? I have over 30 students and I'm not sure if they're international.
I'd like to ask a question to that person who is asking about whether or not they're international. I'm not sure what you mean by international. So I can answer the question this way. In Workday, you can run a Find Suppliers report. You can add in the student names and have the report returned, and the report will give you their addresses. It will also give you the groups that they're in. So if by international you mean are they non-resident alien, then they'll show up as a 1042 as their tax category. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you were looking for. I'm not sure if there's anything else either in Workday, Raphael, that would allow them to see anything like that.
Raphael, do you want to add?
Really, there's no real reports right now that we can capture, whether they're non-resident alien, resident alien, or even international student. If you have questions on your 30 students, you can reach out to us, send us an email, again, to controller_payroll. And we can do a quick review of those for you to see who we have on file. And then you can monitor them that way.
Yeah. Thank you. There's a question about the questionnaire. So that's probably Elizabeth. When students apply for a job, is it possible to state on the Workday questionnaire, are you an international student? If yes, are you in the US? This information is required for payment purposes. Could we get this information from the onset so we all know?
So I believe we had talked about that previously, and I don't know that it was a recommendation that we're able to do that at the time the questionnaire was created. We can definitely take that back and relook at that again. So thank you for providing that feedback.
Thank you. One more question. This is more, as the person introduced it, going back to basics. For rehiring a student from FY20 for the same position, can the add job feature be used? And I'm not sure if this is Workday, if it's Steph, or if it's Kelly.
If you're rehiring someone into a prior position, you can certainly use add job. And, you know, as long as the person is not an NRI.
Thank you, Steph. Should the supplier invoices be processed on the job's normal pay schedule, monthly, bi-weekly, weekly? I guess that's Raphael or Charlene.
Yes, you should, but you need to give yourself some, and inform the students to give you some lead time. If they're on a bi-weekly pay schedule, if you follow like the payroll deadline similar to what's on the payroll website, and you inform the students that they need to submit their invoice and W-8 then by that time, and the department creates the supplier invoice timely and it goes through the business process, the payment timeline will be approximate the same as if they were on payroll. We really do want to try to pay them on the same cycles as much as possible.
Thank you, Charlene. The next person is likely from a department that has a lot of student workers, and their question is, they currently have hundreds of remote student workers in Workday, and they would need to know whether they are non-resident aliens. Can they just send the list to the controller's office to check?
Yes,
I think
yeah,
the problem in you, Raphael.
That's probably me. Yes, but again, going through a couple hundred people, that will take some time. We may be able to work with Rashid and be able to get some information out of Banner to do a quick compare on some of those, to narrow it down to those that are just for national. But shoot us an email, and we can set up a time to talk and kind of take a look at your specific situation for your department.
Thank you, Raphael. I do have another question for you or for your office for taxes. And I know this has been asked already a couple of times and we've answered in writing, but because it keeps coming up, I think we'll just repeat it out loud. This is again about those international students who are in their home countries, who are overseas working remotely. And the question is about taxes. the question basically is, could potentially their earnings be negatively impacted because of the local taxes as opposed to the US taxes? And how might this be addressed? And equity is mentioned, and again, how students could be helped where information can be procured.
So that's a really tough question to answer in this type of forum, because it's really going to depend on the countries that they're in. Each foreign jurisdiction will have their own tax regime. Some students will be negatively impacted if they do have a higher rate in their home country, but some countries don't have income taxes, so those individuals would benefit. So we are probably going to see plus and minuses on both sides, and if students do begin to complain that they're being negatively impacted by their personal tax situation, then that's something we'd have to address at the department level, whether that wanted to be equalized or something like that. But centrally, from a tax perspective, we really can't provide any tax advice on foreign jurisdictions.
Thank you, Raphael. Another question about what is the best way to identify non-US citizen students through Workday. And here they're asking, is that through the Workday individual personal information citizen status?
I mean, technically, no. I mean, we really should be working through Raphael's team for that, just because the status, it's beyond their citizenship status. It also has to do with the type of foreign national that they are. And that does, as it is updated through the FNAS system, that has to be reviewed by his team.
I don't see any more questions coming in, but I was wondering, because there's so much concern about how to identify those international students who are overseas. Kim, would you like to mention that a separate communication went out to a few hundred students as well? So we are trying to help departments.
Yeah, thank you, Libba. That's right. So in addition to communication that went out on Monday to department managers, we did send a targeted communication to a list of international students that we had worked with on the Dean of the College. So that communication did go out to students. So it's, they are also aware that this is the way that they should be paid if they are indeed non-resident aliens working outside of the US.
Thank you, Kim. I don't see any more questions. Again, please raise your hand if you would like to speak or type in the question. No, well, Kim, I don't see any more questions at this time and no raised hands.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Thanks to all of our panelists for their sound advice. And please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. We will share the presentation from today, and we will communicate out about frequently asked questions that we will get up on our website. Thank you, Luba, for moderating, and everyone have a great day.